Hey everyone, welcome to a video where I show off ShmupArch running on the Nintendo Switch. So recently I found a way to improve the performance of ShmupArch on the Switch, whereas before I got it working before, but the performance wasn't all that spectacular. So this was about a year ago, and I didn't really pursue it that much further because yeah, you could run the games, but they didn't run that well. And I was like, well, is it really worth putting your console at ban-worthy risk just to kind of run these games alright? But with this new method that gives you more access to the Switch's RAM and all that good stuff, ShmupArch is able to run pretty much at full capacity. There are a few hiccups here or there, but overall it runs extremely well. And so what I'm doing in this video is just kind of showing you running the more intensive or more popular shmups, and just kind of talking about my thoughts on the idea in general. So the first thing I definitely need to get out of the way are the risks of doing this. So a lot of people, oh yeah, by the way, right here I'm just doing frame advance just to see. Yeah, if it ever stops and goes in slow motion like this, I'm just doing frame advance to check the input lag. Anyway, so yes, a lot of people talk about this Switch as far as it being a great shmup console because of all the stuff coming out for it, which is true. However, the Switch also has this deeper hidden potential as an emulation machine of shmups. And now that ShmupArch is running at full capacity, and in case you aren't familiar with what SA is, it's just my own little configuration of RetroArch that changes all these settings that are pretty confusing to work through and understand, and really hones them in for shmup specifically, because there's a lot of settings that you have to tweak and adjust to really maximize how shmups run within RetroArch. But once you do that, it's, in my opinion, the best emulator around for performance, low input latency, all that good stuff. The only issue is the capability needs to be with the Final Burn Alpha core rather than using the MAME cores. Those are no good. So all footage you see here actually using the new Final Burn Neo core, which I guess it's the new version of Final Burn Alpha. The team changed the name. So with all this great benefit of being able to run all these great shmups, through emulation, I have to go over the risks and why before this point I really haven't been too interested in doing emulation on the Switch. I've done it for myself since I've owned it, but doing it in a more public way, because Nintendo is extremely strict right now about homebrew running on their consoles. If they catch you, they ban your console forever, and that means no eShop, no buying games, no even downloading games you've already purchased. So let's say because the Switch has a low memory, right? So let's say you have Bayonetta 2, Bayonetta 1, Resident Evil 4, Doom, all these games, but you didn't have room for all of them on your memory card or on your Switch's internal memory. Well, if you get banned, you can't access your eShop games anymore to re-download them. You can still play them locally if they're already on your hardware, but if they're not, you can't re-download them on that console. You'd have to buy a new console and re-download them. So I think what Nintendo's trying to do is, any hacked consoles, they just want to put those in the ground. They want them to be as useless as possible. So that's a huge risk. So I would say if you're interested in pursuing this and playing, because there's a lot of really cool benefits, and you're not a PC player, like if you have a PC, I would say just do it on PC unless you want to run them in handheld mode. But if you don't have a PC that can do this, and you do have a Switch and you want to do it on your Switch, I'd recommend getting a new Switch and using your old one for emulation, because the newer Switch models, and then the next one coming out for sure, are harder to do homebrew on, because there's an exploit, a hardware exploit of the original line, or whatever, the original, what would you call it, run of Switches that have a hardware exploit that really can't be patched very well. So they're very vulnerable machines, and I think Nintendo just wants to get rid of them as soon as possible. So my recommendation would be your old Switch. If you're interested in homebrew, use that, and then buy another Switch, either the revision coming up or like a Switch Pro if that ever comes out or whatever, to do your regular switching, because doing both homebrew and using online games or playing or even just buying stuff on the eShop, anything like that, is going to get you caught at one point or another, and you're gonna be unhappy. So that's a huge warning, a huge disclaimer. If you're running homebrew on your Switch and you plan on ever buying stuff, or because it'll be sneaky too, so yeah, I would say just get 2 Switches. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the game we got running here. That was Dodonpachi DOJ. And yeah, you're seeing it was running at full frame rate. You'll notice that it was running at 60 FPS, which isn't the correct frame rate, but I've actually got in contact with the Final Burn Neo team, and they are adjusting that to the correct one. So probably by the time you guys get a hold of this, it will be corrected. So here's Battle Garega, infamously laggy in MAME, but in ShmupArch on your Switch, you get the right settings going like I do here, and bam. This is just me testing the lag. Here we go, we got 1 frame of lag there. 1 frame of emulator lag, and then when you add in the emulation, or the display lag, it ends up about 2 frames. Here's an interesting phenomenon that's going on with the Switch that made me really want to show you guys the footage, because so normally when I use ShmupArch, and I have in this example, I disable VSync because VSync adds lag. However, what's interesting is that normally when you do that, you get screen tearing, especially in Garega. So that's another reason why I tested Garega. But you'll notice watching this, there's no screen tearing going on, but I do have VSync turned off, which is a big question mark of why that is occurring. Why isn't the screen tearing? And this isn't on the handheld, remember, this is up on a display. And I don't understand why the screen is tearing. So I had 2 theories, one much more likely than the other. The extremely likely version is that the Switch just does not allow VSync to ever be disabled, no matter what RetroArch tries to do. It's just not going to be disabled. And the other weirder idea is maybe it has some kind of interesting syncing thing going on. I don't really quite see how that's possible, but I don't know. Like I'm saying, like some kind of weird FreeSync or something. I don't think that's likely. I think it's much more likely that it just will not allow VSync to be disabled. But what's also interesting about this is when I tested for the display lag, it wasn't that much. So I feel like even though maybe it's forcing a VSync, the VSync seems to be not too damaging to the input lag. It's not too laggy. So that's good. So I think all in all, you can play it just like this without any screen tearing, and it does play very well. The lag isn't that bad with the display. So I also did some testing on those tests I showed earlier in one of my articles on something called 240p test speed. And I compared the results of my tests from the handheld to the tests of the display, because of the dock and everything, a little bit of lag gets added to the display that you normally wouldn't see. However, it really is not that much, which I was happy to find out. It's only about, okay, so 25 milliseconds, but it's not really 25 milliseconds, so it's more like, it's hard to explain, but it's more like a half a frame would be a much more simple way to explain it, because 25 milliseconds isn't the exact measurement there. Basically what I was doing is you have to scale the lag in the program to the actual lag going on, and that's kind of tricky to do. But when you scaled it, it's about half a frame, I would say. So you're getting an extra frame of lag every now and then, which isn't as bad as I suspected, to be honest. So even though I still feel like it is laggier than something like a PS4 or a PC, it's not too bad, especially when you get quality emulation like RetroArch going on, rather than just, you know, these really bad ports that are coming out on the system and stuff. So that's good to know. And also the controller lag, if you use a Brooks Ultimate fight board, so not the converters that you stick in, but the fight board, that is a pretty low latency setup there. It's about the same as a Joy-Con, so again, that's about as low as you're gonna get. So I'd recommend that. I think the Hori arcade stick's also pretty low latency, but I haven't tested that personally. So there was Garega, and the gameplay on this is pretty meh, but it's just to show you how the games run. Notice those two last games, there is no stuttering really, no noticeable problems. They ran very smoothly, just like they would on PC. So here we get to the fun one, Gunbird, right? Because the port by ZeroDev has an absolutely ridiculous amount of lag, which I kind of understand why that's going on, because Gunbird seems to have a lot of lag in emulation. So even in Final Burn Neo, RetroArch, it has about 3 frames of lag. That's a lot less than what the Switch version has, the ZeroDev version. But remember, you can use run ahead. So when you put run ahead on, you can drop that down to about 2 frames. You could drop it down to 1, but I found that the Switch doesn't quite have the horsepower to do that smoothly, so you get some stuttering. Whereas if you drop it down to just 2 frames of lag, which isn't too bad, I mean that's better than 5 or whatever that you were getting before, so it's a huge improvement. So yeah, you can indeed play Psycho games on the Switch with a lower input lag than the ZeroDev ports. The only problem is that Gunbird 2 and Strikers 2, they're a little different than how Gunbird 1 runs, for whatever reason. So when you emulate them, they have low input lag, but the problem is that something on the Switch struggles with them, and they have some stuttering problems. Now I think these problems can be mitigated with some settings, but they don't completely go away. There is always a little extra stuttering than there should be, so that's a bummer. I think those games are just cursed, so I guess you can either choose to play them with a little bit of stuttering, or to play the ultra laggy ZeroDev ports until hopefully M2 comes along and does a Psycho collection or something. That's what I'm hoping for. I don't think it'll happen, but that would be nice. But Gunbird 1 and some of the other Strikers games, yeah, they run smoothly. I'm not sure about Dragon Blades. I should have tested that. I think this is a good section to show the lag, because stuff like this on the ZeroDev port is absolutely ridiculous. Because remember, the hitboxes in Gunbird are massive, and they're weird. And then when you add in lag on top of that, it is very, very difficult to play this game. I would say the majority of shmups will run at a really good frame rate and really good input lag level. It's just a few stubborn ones like Gunbird 2 and stuff that they'd certainly run, but they just got some stuttering problems that hopefully can be resolved in the future. So some other things I should point out about the Switch, if you're running homebrew on it, is that, okay, so when I was first playing it in dock mode, and I think this is where the stuttering could be smoothed over. I need to do this again. But when I was running it in docked mode, it seemed to perform less well than in handheld mode when I was emulating Shmups, and I couldn't figure out why. It's like, why is it running worse in docked mode? This doesn't make sense. All the settings were exactly the same. It's because I had to actually manually install some homebrew to overclock the Switch in docked mode. And once I did that, it worked a lot better. So when you go into RetroArch, there is an overclocking setting under main menu. Set that to max, and then there's also an overclocking setting homebrew that you can use, which will also improve the performance. So up next is Ketsui. This one's an interesting one because M2 mentioned that they weren't able to get it running on the Switch when they were considering maybe porting it. But, you know, and I'm sure that's true with what they were using. But Ketsui with Final Burn Neo on RetroArch indeed runs at full speed, no stuttering, low input lag. It's the whole package right here. So I thought it'd be cool to show it off a little bit. Yeah, and so I was considering whether or not to do an instructional video on how to do the homebrew. But if enough of you are interested in this and want to try it out, let me know and I'll make the video. It's just kind of complicated, and it's a little bit more complicated these days because there are certain revisions of the Switch that are much more difficult to hack. And so I would just want to make sure you guys have the right stuff that you need to do. But the original line or whatever, the original run of them are all very exploitable because of the NVIDIA recovery mode exploit you can use. There are some drawbacks to running homebrew on the Switch as well. One is that at this point there's no stable permanent installation of homebrew, which sucks. So that means every time you launch your Switch, you have to inject the homebrew every single time. And depending on how you want to do this, it can be more annoying. So the way I do it is I actually have it set in my memory or whatever through some programs that my Switch, whenever I turn it on, automatically goes into recovery mode. So that means I don't need to do the glitch with the pin jumping and all that every single time. I don't need to do that anymore. I have it set where it automatically goes into recovery mode, which for the most part is really nice. The only issue is that means every time I want to play my Switch, I have to inject homebrew in first. So I need to have a computer nearby. It's not that big of a deal. So but if I'm out and about and my Switch is in low battery, I can't let it die before I charge it. Otherwise I'd have to re-inject it. It sounds a lot more annoying than it actually is. So that was Ketsui. Now I wanted to finish off this last one with a really fun one. Esperade. This game is actually coming to the Nintendo Switch, and I encourage you all to buy it because the port is most likely going to be very solid. It's by M2, and it's going to have a lot of cool extra content that aren't, within the arcade version, so it's going to be worth your time and money anyway. I'm sure there's going to be some arranged modes, improved graphics, all that good stuff. It'll be really interesting to see how the Switch handles all that. I'm not surprised Esperade is the first shmup that M2's done to come to the Switch though, because for whatever reason, Esperade emulates very well and on a bunch of stuff. It seems to be a very easy shmup to emulate for whatever reason, at least with Final Burn Alpha. For example, I have Final Burn Alpha on my PS Vita, and there are some games it can emulate and some games it just can't. So the Vita has the power to run Esperade full power, Dodonpachi full power, but it really struggles with stuff like Ketsui and DOJ. The PGM games are more demanding. So that's probably why Ketsui struggled to get on the Switch, is because it's a PGM game, so it's harder. But Esperade emulates super well, so I'm not surprised it can get running up on the Switch. So if you guys are wondering why they're able to do Esperade but not Ketsui, that's probably why. Overall, this is one of my favorite shmups. It's got its flaws, but at the end of the day, it's still so much fun to play that it's alright. Some of the famous flaws are just with the scoring system. Most people don't bother with it anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. But there is a weird milking issue in the game where if you want really high scores, you're going to have to end up milking the boss patterns over and over, and it seems really monotonous. Again though, I don't want to overemphasize that because it's not like most players do that. Most players don't do that anyway, and I think the M2 port will probably have some kind of mode to address that. Either an arrange or like a slight version arrange, you know, like 1.1 or something. I feel like the scoring system in this game is a little bit of a forerunner to Ketsui. Though I do wish the cubes would fly to you. It's kind of annoying. It makes sense why, but it's kind of annoying how they just float and you have to catch them. You can also see how this game influenced Toho too, right? With like the item dropping and being a humanoid and just the general bullet patterns and stuff. You could see where it was probably quite of an influence on Toho. So I don't want this video to go on too long, but I thought it'd be good to just give you, a lot of different games to look at and think about with the performance, because like I said, certain shmups emulate much better than others, and it's impressive what the shmup is able to put out. I mean, the fact that I can run Ketsui and DOJ is pretty impressive. I haven't really tested this 100% fully as far as what other homebrew methods might be available. Like, if, for instance, with frame skipping, because I just imagine most people are not going to want to play with frame skipping on, so I don't even bother with it. But something like that might really help with Gunbird 2's stuttering. I'm just not sure how playable that type of thing would be. I do know back on the PSP I used to use frame skipping for everything because I didn't quite have enough power to run anything. So I played games with a lot of frame skipping going on. So some final thoughts before I play this video out. I guess if you guys are interested in checking this out, please let me know, because really I'm not going to do a video explaining how to get homebrew running on the Switch unless there is some sort of demand for it, just because it's going to be a complicated video and that sort of thing. Also, again, just a word of warning, if you are interested in running homebrew on the Switch, you're going to have to either just accept the fact that you will be banned from online services on that console, or look into getting a second console, because I think while it might be possible to get away with both, I just feel like you can very easily slip up, and once you do, it's over. So I think the risk is just too high to count on being able to avoid getting banned, because I don't think that'll happen. So anyway, yeah, I'll let the rest of the video play out. Thanks for tuning in and listening and watching. Hopefully this was of interest. I know a lot of people are interested in running shmups on the Switch, and so it would be interesting to see how many cross over into wanting to look into homebrew on the Switch.